So I don't know why I wanted to make this video, but I wanted to show off what useful information, or useless information I know about Dark Souls 3, aka my favorite game of all time. If it tells you anything about how much I love this game, I platinumed it twice. Yeah, twice. I'm crazy. Which means I have farmed for Covenant items for both Sword Grasses and Proof of Concord Keps twice without going online and PvPing. For those of you that don't know, the way to obtain Covenant items without going online is farming certain enemies that have an obscenely low drop rate of these items, where when you turn these items into your respective covenant, having a certain number of them grants you items that are required for achievements like Master of Gestures, Master of Rings. Curse the damn Dark Moon Ring. I don't ever want to get 30 Proof of Concord Keps again. If you have ever farmed Anwar Londo for hours on end killing those 2 Silver Knights, I feel your pain. Now, before I get into anything, we're going to go over every meta weapon in the game for every build, to an extent. I have my character here. He is level 300. As you can see, I have level 60 in every attribute where damage matters. I don't PvP with this build, but I was planning on doing multiple runs of the game, and I was going to do a tier list based on a weapon class on how easy the game was with that weapon class. So on this character, I do have the best of every weapon class leveled up all the way, and I'm going to be reviewing them to you now. And then we will proceed to do a short review of what rings are useful and what rings are basically useless, which 90% of them in this game are. Start off in my left hand here, in my right hand, we have just the normal old dagger. Now, if you PvP, you always want to have one of these in your offhand, because if you parry and you have the Hornet Ring, you will most likely have your dagger infused with Chaos. But for whatever reason, the Chaos Dagger does the most amount of critical damage in the game. I actually don't know why this wouldn't be infused with Deep, because Deep does dark damage. I suppose the reason it's Chaos is because it's a split between physical and fire, and if it was a fire gem or a deep gem, it removes the physical damage period and just replaces it with fire or dark, which I can't imagine is the worst thing in the world, because if you didn't know, the meta in this game for infusements is dark, because every armor set in the game has the least amount of dark defense. So dark builds in this game are absolutely broken because they do a shit ton of damage and no one has tons of defense for it unless you're specifically running a stone plate dark ring. In my left hand here, I have a refined broadsword. To my knowledge, in a refined build, this is the highest damage you're going to get from a straight sword. The main problem with this weapon is it is very short. It is probably the shortest straight sword, which does hold it back quite a bit. It is held back a lot by its range, and I'm going to talk about 2 other straight swords that are meta. This is usually my go-to weapon when starting a new character, because infusing it with raw early game, you get it early game so this is usually my weapon of choice for starting a new character, no matter what the class, because it has low stat requirements. Literally, the deprived could use it. Get the raw gem early, and you get the weapon in Lothric Castle as well, so you could literally just infuse this with raw and then go through half the game with just this weapon and you'd be just fine. But this weapon shines mostly in a refined build. It also has a unique charge dart too, where you take a couple steps forward and attack. To my knowledge, there's not any other weapon in the game that has this, and I believe it is unique to the broadsword, but I could be wrong. Next weapon in our offhand is arguably the most OP PvP weapon in the game. It is yet again another straight sword, and it is probably the best. Believe it or not, it's the 3rd strongest straight sword to my knowledge in terms of damage. It might honestly even be the 4th. It is the most overpowered PvP weapon in the game because it has absurd range. Like, compare the size of the broadsword, teeny. Compare the size to the Lothric Knight straight sword, it is absolutely massive, and it gets good scaling in absolutely every category except strength, probably. It does okay in refined. It is great in sharp as well as any other elemental status. This weapon, it can be universal with pyromancers, faith, as well as magic, and it gets insane damage everywhere. And like I said, the range is nuts. It doesn't have a unique moveset. It does have the square off, which is always nice for PvP and people that like to spam shields. that don't know any better, but it's mostly carried by its range and versatility of infusion. And my personal favorite straight sword here, we have just the regular old longsword that is the starting weapon for the knight. It gets better damage than the Lothric Knight straight sword, and if you compare, it's not much shorter enough to make a difference, and you get more damage, and it is better for a strength build anyways, which is my preferred build over dexterity. So I use the longsword over the Lothric Knight straight sword 9 times out of 10. Alrighty, moving on to daggers. If you're not going for riposte, if you're going for just straight damage, Rotten Corvian Great Knife. And the reason this one is the best is because its range is nuts. Like, if you compare it to the Lothric Knight straight sword, it's pretty dang good. It's fast, and it does good damage, and it is completely spammable because it does not use too much stamina. Its weapon art is a little sidestep. I don't believe it's useful. If it was the quick step, it would be a lot better. There's no follow-up to it. It's just this stab. I believe it goes around shields. Yeah, yep, it does indeed bypass shields because you're essentially stabbing from the side. It shines and it's one-handed. It's still fast with its side-to-side one-handed. If I was using a fast weapon one-handed, I would much prefer a straight sword to this. But it is much faster, and the lunging attack is nice for two-handing. And if we want to talk about the absolute most damaging straight sword in a strength build, we have the dark sword here when it's heavy infused. It is the absolute best straight sword. This one has also a unique heavy. It's meant to mimic like what the Dark Wraiths do in their movesets. I've admittedly never used it because dark sword, it's kind of seen as like a bit of a noob weapon. We're going to talk about 3 different great swords real quick because they're all worth mentioning. First of all, we have the Old Wolf's Curse Sword, or Wolf Knight's Greatsword Sar. It is Artorias' weapon, and you get it from defeating the Abyss Watchers. Standard Greatsword moveset, which is always nice. Great in PvP, great in PvE. Probably my favorite weapon class in this game because it is just so versatile. It's fast, it does good damage, it doesn't have the most end lag, it's not slow. R1 is nice for crowd control and invasions. But what's nice about the Wolf Knight Greatsword is this one specifically gets good damage. Its weapon art is very good. This is the AS2, so this is the heavy. It's the flip attack that Artorias does, and this is the light. The light is only good in PvE for crowd control, and this move is okay in PvP, and it does so much damage if it actually lands. But other than that, in PvE, this weapon does bonus damage to abyssal enemies, which if you're struggling with Midir, just go ahead and pick up this weapon, and you do, I believe, a increased 20 damage. And it also has a unique heavy. Two-handed version, he does like a little charge forward stab, which it has really good range. Okay, moving on to the Claymore. Now, I believe, to my knowledge, the Wolf Knight Greatsword does beat the Claymore in terms of damage, just by a little bit, but the Claymore is much more versatile and it does not weigh as much. I believe this weapon is good in absolutely every build except strength, because if you're using a strength build, you want to use probably a different... Actually, I see the Claymore is such a versatile weapon, it can work out with any build. It's like the Lothric Knight straight sword, where it's great on any infusion. Absolutely any infusion, and you'll always get good damage with it. Other than that, it's pretty basic. It's the basic moveset. Has the square off. It's super basic, but it has good range, and it's just super versatile, and it gets great damage. Now, if you're running a dex build, then the weapon you want to use is the Flamberg, or the Flamberge, because when it is infused with a sharp gem, it does beat out the Claymore in damage. And it does have a bonus of coming with a bleed status effect, but if you know about bleed in this game, it was nerfed to hell. There's nothing like it is in Elden Ring, where Elden Ring bleed is absolutely meta, even in PvE, where bleed in PvE is non-existent in Dark Souls 3, and it is very bad in PvP. And it is farmable from only 2 enemies, to my knowledge, in the game. It is from the little thralls in Undead Settlement. Now moving on to Ultra Greatswords. The most damaging Ultra Greatsword with the overhead moveset is the regular old Greatsword. Now, you only want to run greatswords if you're running a strength build. You don't want to run it with a refined build, because you're just not going to get the damage you want from a slow weapon if you're not running a strength build. So I have all of, even though I do have these refined infused, that is because my build is 60 in every attribute. But if you're running like 40 in every attribute, or like 40 in the attribute that you need for damage, you're going to want to infuse that with that respective gem. So if you're running a strength build, you want to do heavy. If you're running dex, you probably shouldn't be running a straight sword, or ultra great sword, because I don't think you want to invest 28 strength into an ultra great sword. So most damage you'll get is with the heavy greatsword. Like the Claymore and Lothric Knight's greatsword, here we have the Astora greatsword. It is the lightest greatsword. It has good range. It's not lacking in range at all. And it is the most versatile in terms of infusions for the Ultra Greatsword class. And it gets an S scaling in Sharp, so it does especially good in Dex, and I believe it also gets good scaling in every other elemental damage. But be careful when you're using the weapon art in PvP, because this weapon art is unbelievably easy to parry. For every, like, frame you're charging, you have a hitbox active, and if their opponent parries one, you're just screwed. And the absolute most damaging Ultra Greatsword here is, and the strongest weapon in the game that you can buff, is the Lothric Knight Ultra Greatsword. I love this weapon so freaking much because it does so much damage in a heavy faith build. Because if you put Lightning Blade on this thing with I have a refined infusion on it right now, but if I had a heavy or a sharp infusion, it could get even more damage. Because a Lothric Knight Ultra Greatsword with Lightning Blade is just absolutely busted. So use this weapon if you want to do absolute most damage for an Ultra Greatsword. Now, the best Falchion in the game, Falchions are very similar to straight swords, but they are faster but have a bit less range. Falchion is the best curved sword. It gets the most amount of damage. It's fast, it has decent range. The weapon art is nothing to cry home about. There are better curved swords for PvP, especially the Erathilian curved sword, as well as the Karthus curved sword. That was the absolute meta weapon when the game first came out, because the bleed scaling on it was absolutely insane before they nerfed it. Falchion's good. It can be buffed as well to get the damage a bit higher. And here we have the absolute best PvE weapons in the game. We have the Sill swords, straight swords. These things are broken. Like, I don't know if I have to say anything, because they're a starting weapon for the mercenary. They're broken when they're infused with a sharp gem. And they're okay when they're infused with a refined gem, but you don't want to infuse these things with a heavy gem because you're just not going to get the damage you want. One of my favorite PvE builds is Dex Faith, buffing these things with Lightning Blade, and having Pontiff's Right Eye with the Old Wolf Curve Sword. Having just all those buffs stack, you get insane damage. Talking about curved swords, if you absolutely want the highest damaging curved sword, we have the Exile Greatsword here. You get it early in the game, but you're not going to be able to wield it till later in the game because it does have some pretty hefty stat requirements. Curved Greatswords are fun in PvP because they have a nice delay to their attack. They it's like an auto roll catcher almost. Exile Greatsword is one of the most broken PvP weapons in the game because it can also be buffed to have its damage buffed even more. It's good in a strength scaling and it's good in a refined scaling, but it's not so much a dex scaling weapon. And it doesn't do the best scaling in terms of elementals either. But here we have the Marakuma, which is the exact opposite as the Exile Greatsword, where it's same moveset. I believe this one does have more range. Maybe not, maybe they have about the same. But this is a ultra curved sword, or curved greatsword for dex users. So infuse this with a sharp gem and you will get pretty fantastic damage. There's only 2 rapiers I'm going to go over. Every rapier that's not the S-Talk is useless. There might be rapiers that get more damage than the S-Talk, but in a Dex or refined build, the S-Talk has the most range and I believe the most damage as well, so there's no point running any other rapier other than this one. And it can also be buffed to increase your damage. And here we have the Crystal Sage's Rapier. You don't actually use this thing to fight with. Just having it equipped in general boosts your item discovery. You can see I have 161 item discovery there, and when I take it off, I have 111. So it gives you 50 item discovery. So if you're grinding for those Covenant items, you always want to have that in your offhand so you can get the drops. For katanas, if you are going for the most damaging katana, here we have the Chaos Blade. Has the second most range for a katana. If you want absolute range for a katana with good damage as well, there's the washing pole, and its running attack is broken. It does a stab and has so much range. It has like the range of a spear. The main drawback of this weapon is whenever you land a hit on anything, you get damaged for, I believe, 10 damage, because it does get an S scaling when you have it upgraded all the way. I believe it is not infusible. No, it is not infusible, and it also cannot be weapon buffed, but its base damage is really good. Standard weapon arts, nothing too special, but it just does the most damage for katanas in a dex build. Which brings us to the Black Blade, which is the most damaging katana for a strength build. Even with a heavy infusion, I believe the infusion only gets to a B, which isn't the worst, but it's the best for a strength build. So if you're running a strength build and you want to use a katana, the Black Blade is your best bet with a B scaling. It does have a unique R2, and I didn't find out about it till well into my Dark Souls 3 journey, as well as a swipe, which is pretty good for roll catching in PvP. And it also can be infused to buff your damage just a little bit more. Alright, so we're going to talk about a few different axes. So for the first half of the game, if you get the Dragon Slayer axe, not to be confused with the Dragon Slayer Great Axe, this weapon, when I believe it is sharp infused, I believe it is the most damaging axe. It has the Warcry weapon art to buff its damage, but I recommend putting Lightning Blade on this to buff its already split damage of lightning even more. And this weapon, since it has pretty decently low stat requirements, people run this in low level invasions and just absolutely obliterate people because it does do a ton of damage, and honestly it just looks sick. You get it from Creighton, which is from Sirius's quest line, which is a bit of an annoyance, and it's not too accessible. Unless you do the quest line, you don't get it until like Irithyll, which is almost halfway through the game. Moving on to the Millwood Great Axe, or the Millwood Axe. This is, in my opinion, my favorite axe, because you do get the most amount of damage with it being heavy infused, because I believe it gets an A. It has good range, and I like that when axes hit, your character kind of takes a step forward, so no matter what, axes will always kind of have good range, and the R1 is just as good, and it might even be faster. But what really sells this weapon is the weapon art. You run forward and use Warcry, and the Warcry, since this is a mobile Warcry normally staggers opponents, but you usually never use it next to opponents because it'll leave you open. But the thing about this charge attack is if you run into opponents with it, it staggers them into a true combo with your Warcry, but I don't believe it leads into any hits. It'll just stagger them with the Warcry. But, like I said, most damaging strength axe, and it is also buffable. Moving on to an absolutely broken set of axes in PvP is if you're running a persistent constant attacking build, so like I said with the Old Wolf Curved Sword as well as Pontiff's Right Eye, if you land these, with Lightning Blade also infused, because these can be infused, I'm talking like upwards to 600, 700 damage, maybe even more. They're absolutely broken. Main issue about them is they don't have the most range, but that doesn't matter when you just can attack 4 times with weapons that do insane damage. They do weigh a bit more, like they're 8.5 weight, and the Millwood Battle Axe is 6.5. One thing that's not great about them is the weapon art. You spin. It takes up so much FP and so much stamina, and it never connects, and none of it's true. So I'd say only go for it if you aren't confident in, for whatever reason, hitting your L2s trying to roll catch. But it's just more of a gimmick than actually being viable. Now, something that surprised me was just the regular old Great Axe is the most damaging Great Axe. And that kind of sucks because I believe it is also the least ranged. It has like the least amount of range. They're kind of slow. It has a Warcry weapon art. It gets its special R2 just like any other Warcry. It's pretty freaking cool. It can be infused. can be also buffed. The main thing holding this weapon back is its range, but other than that, it has fantastic damage. And it also doesn't weigh too much for a great axe. Now, my personal favorite great axe is this right here, which is the Dragon Slayer Great Axe. One of the most damaging weapons in the game. And I want to show you something, but I need more blue. One of the most damaging weapons in the game, one of my personal favorites. Has good range, has good base damage. Does good in just a regular strength build because it doesn't actually require any sort of faith, even though it has some lightning damage. But other than its great damage and great range, it has probably one of my most favorite weapon arts in the game. That weapon art does so much damage and is great in both PvE and PvP. Now, surprisingly, just a regular old mace, I believe, is the absolute best mace because it can be infused. It is good with refined and heavy. I think it's decent with sharp. It's light. It has perseverance, which is nice. Perseverance is always nice on weapons. Can be infused with lightning blade to make this thing do absolutely crazy damage. Maces are always good for roll catching with the two-hand. The one-handed it's easy to parry and you have no poise with it. So just use a straight sword if you're planning on one-handing a lighter weapon. The only other hammer mace class, or the only other mace worth bringing up is the Drang hammers. Now, these things took a while to grow on me because to be honest, like I was saying, a one-handed mace is not great, as well as these weapons are insane if you can actually land hits. If you're earning, yet again, the persevering damage build with the Pontiff's Right Eye and the Old Wolf Curve Sword with Lightning Blade, this weapon art right here, if you do hit the 1 into the weapon art, that is true, and it will one-shot most people with that build. It's insane. But the thing is, most people know about it, and it's this move right here is so slow, you actually need to actually hit it to kill them, and it is very difficult. Now, I'm not certain if the Great Club is the most damaging Great Hammer. I believe I just have it because I was doing a infused build. Well, I wanted to use Lightning Blade because using Lightning Blade absolutely buffs any sort of weapon's damage through the roof. So I'm not sure if the Great Club is the best, but I wouldn't doubt if it is. Charge Dart 2 for them is always great, does so much damage and is easy roll catching. Never one-hand a Great Hammer because it is beyond easy to parry. Great Club is good because it does good damage. R2 is insane for roll catching, and it can also be buffed, which doesn't make much sense because you can do this. You can set wood on fire and it won't burn. It's great. And then the other hammer we're going to talk about is the Spiked Mace, which is another one of my favorite PvP weapons. It's good in a refined, sharp, and heavy. It's okay in heavy. It's better in refined and sharp. But the reason this is one of my more favorite PvP weapons is because it's hard to hit, because Ultra Great Hammers are hard to hit in general because they're slow. People know the moveset. They take a lot of stamina. But if you do manage to hit it, this weapon can be buffed, by the way, so that's already a huge plus. You do your R1 into the first hit of weapon art into another R1, and that is a true combo. Sometimes if you hit an R1 into the full weapon art, it's sometimes true, but I believe people are able to roll out of it, but that is another one of my favorite PvP weapons. Now, the most damaging spear that can be buffed is the Partisan. I believe it is better sharp infused than it is refined infused, but like I said, my build, I have it refined infused because I have 60 in each, which makes it ultimately better at this level. It can be buffed. It has good range, a bit less for a spear, but it has good range for a spear. Surprisingly, it has a spin weapon art, which I'm not sure if it's a hit weapon art 1 into hit again. I don't know if that's true. I've never really PvP'd with spears. Spears are okay in PvP or PvE, and they're okay in PvE as well. Now, another one we can mention is this spear here. It is the Golden Ritual Spear, and I honestly forget where you even get this weapon. I think you get it before Aldrich. Normal spear, I think it does pretty pathetic damage, but a fun fact about it is if you want to cast spells and use a weapon at the same time, you can do that. But I just recommend running a staff in your offhand while using a weapon in your right hand if you are a sorcerer. Now, this is the longest reaching spear. This is the Lothric Knight Spear. When you have it equipped, it does give you a boost in poise as well as a bit of a hidden note, because you can see right there I have 28.25 poise. If I were to remove it, I now have 15.9, so it gives you like 13. I think it gives you percentage boost in poise. I have it refined because, again, my build. I believe it's the most range. No, the Saint Bident is the most range. This one is like the second, I believe. But you can't buff the Saint Bident. But it is better in a Faith build because it does get a Faith scaling. So you want to infuse that with either Lightning or Blessed. So if you want to go for absolute range, go for the Saint Bident, but you won't get as much damage, and it can't be buffed, while the Lothric Knight Spear can be buffed, and you're not going to be missing out on much range. Plus, you do get a bit of a poise increase just for having it equipped. Now, if you dabble in halberds, especially these ones, you and your whole family hate you, and so does everyone else. Because if you PvP with these weapons, it's so hard to explain, but you are you're just kind of a bitch for running this weapon. Because it's not fun, it's not interesting, it can be buffed, they're good, and they do insane damage, and you have a lot of hyper armor whenever you attack, but you're just stupid if you use this, and no one likes you. The most damaging halberd that can also be buffed. It's great in heavy scaling. It's the Winged Knight Halberd. Does good damage. It can also be infused with Lightning Blade. You get good range, good base damage. Its weapon art was nerfed, so you can do this until your stamina runs out or your FP runs out. It's kind of like the curved swords where it is not true and people can fall out of it easily, and it's just a waste of your stamina. Next we have the Split Leaf Greatsword. This can also be buffed, and it is also a great weapon for PvP, because if a weapon has extended combos that are true, like you can do this. Like every combo has a two-hit true combo, but if you can go past that and get more damage, you can do this with the Split Leaf Greatsword. You can do an R1 into first hit of weapon art into the second hit of the weapon art, and that's completely true. And you can also do this. Bop, first hit of weapon art into the second hit of heavy. And that is all true. And if you do that with a Lightning Blade Persevering Attack build, like I've explained before, you can almost one-shot people, but I don't believe it. If they have lower vigor, you can definitely one-shot people. Now, I don't know much about the upcoming weapons because I ultimately have not used them much. That's why I wanted to do the idea of going through the game with every weapon class, the best weapon of every weapon class. Here we have the Corvian Great Scythe. It can be buffed. They get good range and they have good speed. I've never really PvP'd with them other than Freitas Scythe, which Freitas Scythe is always fun to use. Which I do think it is the best scythe if you are going for damage, but Lightning Blade buff just makes everything so much better. It's fast. I don't like the R2 as much with scythes because I feel like you're faster with the R1, and it looks like you have more range too. The weapon art's cool. You do like a neck swipe. I believe that's actually what it's called. Yeah, neck swipe. It has bleed. We get double B and refined, but I believe this weapon is better at lower levels with a sharp infusion. Here we're talking about something I know nothing about. Here we have the sharp whip, and believe it or not, even with strength and dexterity at level 60, this weapon still does get better damage with just a regular sharp infusion, which means we get absolutely nothing from strength, even if we refine infused it. It can be buffed. Whips have no hitbox. They're awkward. No one wants to use a whip in a game where you have melee weapons. If you're ever going up against someone that's using a whip in PvP, you just kind of roll your eyes. The R2 is kind of nice because it does roll catch pretty easily. It can be free aimed. I believe there's like a certain property where if you hit your opponent with the weapon art and their stamina, recovery speed does get slowed a bit. That's honestly all I have to say about the whips. Here we have fist weapons, where the best dexterity fist weapons is the Crow Talons from the Ashes Very End DLC. Has the base fist attack. You do get high bleed on these, so if you're doing a bleed build and you have the Carthus Rouge, which is your bleed infusion, these do have pretty good bleed on them. The weapon art's pretty cool too. You hit so many times, and that's what makes the bleed scaling so high. So you're gonna be pretty good on actually proccing bleed with these weapons. But other than that, the R1 is nothing special. The L2 is your standard L2. And then you have your weapon art. Now the best strength weapon for fist weapons is your Cestus. And I do have them skilled cestus. Does that mean I have refined on them? Why doesn't it just say refined cestus? I kind of caught me off guard when it said skilled. Anyways, you have your same moveset. These things are super annoying in PvP, and people usually have it in their offhand as a parry weapon, including myself. The weapon art is super good. You have Perseverance, which is super annoying in PvP because you could just run up to someone, Perseverance, and then just hit them 4 times because these things actually do pretty good damage. So, use a Cestus, and I believe it was better at my level with Refined than it was Heavy, even though they are better Heavy at a lower level. Now we have a couple staffs we're going to go over. If you are a high level mage, you want to be using the Court Sorcerer staff. There's another choice. You can use the, whatever it's called, the Sage's Crystal staff. That one I believe is only a little bit worse. So if you're more accessible to the Sage's Crystal staff, it is heavier, and I think when you have the weapon buff, it is actually better. I'm just not sure by how much since I don't run sorceries too often. And by the way, if you're running a sorcerer build, you always want to be running the Crown of Dusk here, because while it does make your magic resistance abysmal, it gives you minus 30%, it does, I believe, boost your damage by I believe it's like 15 or 20%. So, Court Sorcerer Staff is your best in terms of scaling and damage. This is pretty good. It's early game. It's not the greatest in terms of damage, but it's the White Tree branch, by the way, or the Witch Tree branch. It has a natural cast speed improvement as a bonus affinity. I don't know if you can tell any difference, but it does cast faster, and that's just a little fun fact about it. This is the Murky Longstaff. If you want to bonk people, this is the longest staff. Don't know why would you want to bonk people, but you get this from the Ring City, and it does have the most range. Or it does boost dark damage. So if you're using dark spells, you definitely want to be using the Murky Longstaff. A bit of another thing we can mention is this is the Isolus staff. It's also pretty long. You get it from Smoldering Lake. And it also boosts dark damage, but I believe the Murky Longstaff is better. And I'm not going to go over the Pyromancy Flame, because it's just what you use to cast flame or pyromancies. We will talk about the chimes, though. This is Yorshka's chime. It is the best for spell buff. It gives you the best spell buff for your faith incantations. So if you're running like a lightning build or lightning blade, this is definitely the one you want to be using. This is Kaitha's chime. If you are using dark miracles, this is what you want to be using. But I believe at a certain level, the crystal chime is better for dark sorceries anyways. But a fun fact about the crystal chime, while it is good for just faith abilities, it can also be used to cast intelligence, which is a bit weird. You can cast faith spells and intelligence spells, but it is pretty cool. And then one more thing we can talk about is Sacred Chime of Filianor. It is a contender for the best talisman. It is up there with the Crystal Chime and the Yorshka's Chime. You could honestly use this one if you want. The only reason you would, though, is for this weapon art. It gives you a passive, and it also does give you pretty good damage in terms of faith spells. Alright, I believe we covered every weapon class, except bows. I guess we can go over bows real quick. I don't have them on my character right now, but just to go over real quick, the Dragon Slayer, or the Millwood Greatbow is best for strength builds. The Oni Slayer Greatbow is better for dexterity builds. And as for crossbows, use the Aeroblast. For your offhand, you usually want to just be running a shield. If you have it simple infused, you have FP passive regeneration. If you have it blessed infused, you get passive HP regeneration. And then I usually keep a Grass Crest shield in my inventory for stamina regen. It's usually only good for PvE. And then I sometimes have the Shield of Want as well, just so I can quick swap after I beat a boss to get more souls. I don't know if there's anything else I need to go over. Oh yeah, we were gonna do rings. So I don't think I have every ring, because I use this character to give some of my other characters other rings. So we'll go over what rings I do have here. Life ring +3 gives you a decent amount of health, so it is just good running it is just nice running if you don't have anything else. Sun Princess ring is very niche. It heals you passively. It is good in invasions if you run out of Estus, and that's about it. The Ashen Assist ring makes it so when you drink a blue flask, you gain a little bit more, as well as the Estus ring. It does the same thing, but for your heal. Howl's ring +3 gives you tons more equip load. Ring of Favor gives you more health, stamina, and equip load. Same with the Prisoner's Chain. It makes your vigor, endurance, and vitality 5 levels higher, and it's one of the best rings in the game. Now the ring is still protection. It basically is just another piece of armor. Magic Stone Plate, Flame Stone Plate, Thunder Stone Plate, Dark Stone Plate are all just damage reductions of their respective element. Speckled Stone Plate ring gives you damage absorption in terms of all of them. Blood Bite ring, Poison Bite ring gives you Frozen Bite ring, Curse Bite ring, Flesh Bite ring all give you affinity resistance, which if someone's running a bleed build, you can just pop that on. Poison build, pop that on. Chill Bite, pop that on, and Curse Bite, which I don't know, Curse Bite might be one of the most unused rings ever because you can't even, like, the only places that curse you in this game are Wolnir, as well as the Basilisks. Night Ring increases strength by 5, Hunter Ring increases dexterity by 5, Scholar Ring increases intelligence by 5, as well as the Priestess Ring increases your faith by 5. Covetous Gold Serpent Ring, it boosts your item discovery by quite a bit, as well as the Silver Serpent Ring increases your soul drops by a good amount. Saint's Ring and gives you a attunement slot, same with the Deep Ring. The Dark Moon Ring, which I did have on this character, but I gave to another one, it gives you 2 attunement slots. Young Dragon Ring boosts your sorceries. Bellowing Dragon Crest Ring boosts them greatly, and they do stack, so you can equip these both on a sorcery build. Same with the Great Swamp Ring and the Witch's Ring, which boost your pyromancies, which can also be stacked. We have Morn's Ring, and then the Ring of the Sun's Firstborn. They also stack and boost your Faith Miracles. Here we have the Lingering Dragon Crest Ring, which boosts the length of spell effect. I like running this on my Lightning Blade builds. That way I get more time for Lightning Blade on my weapon. Here we have the Sage Ring. The +2 variation is the best, and it shortens spellcasting time, not by much, but it does by a little bit, but I usually don't think it's worth running in a sorcery build. Wolf Ring increases poise. Horn Ring is a meta ring. It's a meta ring for PvP because it sometimes guarantees an instant kill on a parry. We would also have the Leo Ring as well as the Hawk Ring. The Hawk Ring increases range on bows, and then the Leo Ring increases damage on thrust attacks, I believe, when they trade. I think that's what it is, at least. Ring of the Evil Eye is useless even at the +3. You absorb HP from defeated foes. Farron Ring reduces skill FP consumption from everything. And then we have the Magic Clutch Rings for every damage type. Boosts your damage, but also lowers your damage absorption in every stat, not just magic for Magic Clutch Ring. Red Tearstone Ring boosts your damage by, I think it's 20% when your HP is below 20%. And then Blue Tearstone Ring increases your damage absorption when your HP is low. And then Lloyd's Sword Ring boosts your attack when your HP is full, one of my favorites. Lloyd's Shield Ring does the same thing, but when your HP is full, you take a lot less damage for that one hit. Cardless Milk Ring gives you 3 dexterity and makes your rolls invisible. Cardless Blood Ring makes it so you take a lot more damage. Like, oh wow, it brings it down by like 25. So this ring isn't usually worth running because of the damage reduction in general. Pontiff's Rye Die, I talked about it quite a bit in this video. If your attacking persists, you get a damage boost, and with Pontiff's Left Eye, if your damage persists, you start to heal. Silver Cat Ring, it's a PvP meta ring, where if you drop from a high ledge, you don't take fall damage, to a certain degree at least. Untrue Dark Ring makes you look human. As you can see, I've been wearing it for this entire video because my character looks like bacon. And then we have the Untrue Dark Ring, which makes you look like a phantom. And then to round out, to end it off, we have the Calamity Ring, which makes you take double damage. Don't know why anyone would ever run it. Receive double damage. Now that's about it. That's all I can think of in terms of PvP meta as well as PvE, and it's very informative if you care about a game that came out 7 years ago now, and it is absolutely fantastic. But let me know if you want to see me do that run idea I had where I was just going to run through the game with each weapon type, that would have been a lot of runs considering I would have used almost all these weapons. It would have been around, I think, like 15 runs. But I think the conclusion would have just came to faster weapons are better than slower weapons. So I'm going to come out with a video hopefully soon, no promises, about hidden facts in this game because I do pretty much know absolutely everything. So if you want a video about 10 things you didn't know about Dark Souls 3, let me know in the comments. And thank you for sticking to the end if you did. This is some very useless knowledge about a game that I think is decently active online, but most people are just playing Elden Ring these days. Like I said, leave a like if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.